So remember that this is the IP and regional and national networks, and Martin Levy is going to chair this panel and then introduce John Corinne. But I've got to tell one funny story. Is that okay, Martin? Okay. So the first time I met John was when John and Dan were first coming to NSFNet regional tech meetings. And they came up and said, "So what's this internet?" And I said, "Cool, it's great. They're fast learners. They come back." And I said, "John, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, next week I'm taking my vacation. What are you doing?" "Well, I'm going to work on computer programming." You know, John has always been someone who's, because he had these really cool research projects he wanted to do, and all the network really didn't let him do it, so he's going to take his week off and work on it. Now, John has always impressed me as someone who goes far beyond and is excellent. And I'm sure the rest of the panel, Martin, I'll leave him, but I have a few of those funny stories. Okay.
Okay, we've got the panel before lunch, so we're going to do our best to get out of here on time. The topic is one that you'll see has both relevance to the NANOG community and also is completely ignored by the NANOG community. And this will become evident as you listen to John and to Doug talk. What I'm going to do is sort of give a background. The last 10 years that we have existed as both a set of meetings, as a mailing list, as a group of people, as an idea, have probably been the most tumultuous 10 years as far as corporate events are concerned. Acquisitions and Chapter 11s and mergers and all manner of things. Venture capital and IPOs to give the plus sides as well. So the question is, and the question that I'm going to try and answer and then let John and Doug expound on is, has this actually had any effect on us in any shape, manner, or form? We've had acquisitions, we've had mergers, people are here, some of which still work for the same AS number they worked for many, many years ago, but the name has changed 2 or 3 times. Others have moved around, 2, 3 ASs, 2, 3 different companies, different vendors, etc., etc. We've spent 10 years discussing stuff, and I think that you'll see that we're starting still to discuss the same things. Susan Harris asked us to get together and discuss this. The reality is that some of it still can't be talked about. It would be wonderful to have a few people up on this panel who are right in the midst of companies that are being acquired, being sold, recently gone Chapter 11. But the reality is that we live in a world of NDAs, which at the corporate level is a whole different ballgame from being able to come out and talk about technical research, new research. We just can't do it. So we're going to go with a politically correct version. It's the best and the right thing to do. And as the years go by, stuff gets old enough to talk about, and we'll do that. But let's go back. Let's look at what we talked about 10 years ago and think about the type of agendas that we deal with today and discuss and are interested in. Let's look at the meetings. You look at the subject matter from 10 years ago. We're talking about NAPs. We're talking about peering. This has been a fairly common subject, obviously, within inside the mailing list and also within the various meetings. We've talked about routing databases. We've talked about all manner of things, but these are things that we've been doing pretty much now for 10 years. And you'll notice that there's pretty much nothing, as one would expect in this first meeting, that's essentially commercial. Now, there was a charge that was that the Ameritech NAP and the PacBell NAP and the Sprint NAP wanted to charge for their service, but its origins come out from a more researchy and a requirement to change back to the days of the NSF environment to change the way the internet operated. Routing registries back then 10 years ago, were not charged for. I don't think that even 10 years ago we were charging in any way for address space or anything like that. So there's nothing much commercial here. But if you go look at 30 years, and I know this may not show up as well on the screen, but I'll put out the highlights of this. If I look at the sort of meeting topics over 30 years, and I'll run down these so that I know they're unreadable, but we'll start at the top. The top one is the perennial favorite. We talk about NAPs. We talk about exchange points at some point in time. We talk about performance of NAPs and exchange points. We point fingers in all different directions. It's a very popular topic. But what's interesting is that if we go down the list, I can only find 2 sessions from quite a while ago that talk about peering policy and route filtering from a commercial point of view, not from a technical point of view to do with controlling route table size or to control any form of route flaps or anything like that. So in fact, actually, the circle at the top, two sessions, which is back in NANOG 6 and 7, it's pretty much the only place that we can start talking about commercial entities that have policy on peering or on route filtering. The other thing that's interesting, and slightly mentioned earlier, is that there are 2 sessions about ATM back in NANOG 4 and NANOG 5. And technically, we haven't had a session on ATM since then. But the dotted line will show you we've had an awful lot of sessions about MPLS since then. So a little bit of a hiatus, but we got the ball going again, and everybody had their opinion. But the rest of the subjects are fairly well spread out. I'll run down them so they're easy to read. The top one is NAPs, route filtering, peering policy, talking about transit and various people's transit networks, the RADB and RA software associated with that. Even I have a problem reading this. Okay, security. Why is that so hard to read? IPsec, VPNs, and the like. This is obviously one of the more favorite topics to talk about, which is good to know. DiffServ, QoS, random early discard is the next line. Comes and goes as an interesting subject, but not much more. BGP, OSPF, ISIS. We've had our fair share of talks on that. Not as many as you would think, which is interesting. MPLS has got the dotted line on this. And so on and so forth. TCP is some wonderful talks. In fact, actually, if I want to take an aside here before I sort of hit the key point at the bottom here, take some time, go to the NANOG website, go to the past and previous meetings page, and go review some of the papers that have been presented over the last 10 years. There is excellent work there. There is refresher course type work there. There is a large collection of information there, which I will claim a large amount of it is timely purely because of the mindset. We really haven't changed in our requirements. I'll go all the way down to the bottom there. By the way, IPv6 multicast, always a good favorite to be discussed in one shape or other. A couple of the talks, and only a couple of the talks, actually discussed this in a commercial environment. But the ones that I circled at the bottom were 3 talks, and the only 3 talks I could find fairly early on in the 10 years, which in any way discussed the economics of the business that we're in. There has been no talks in the last 6 or 7 years that discuss the mechanics of how much it costs for us to do business, the mechanics of how much building an IP backbone is worth, all of the things that, in fact, actually are extremely relevant to the corporate world. This basically answers a simple question. We're here to talk about technology, even though the world has changed over 10 years. We've discussed a lot of things. I went back into the mailing lists and had a look at what the volume was of messages that we've seen over 10 years, as good a measure as any to how interested we are in what we do. There's the obvious spikes for events there. I did not mark them out, but September 11th ended up with a large spike. Various worms ended up with worms, viruses, etc., ended up with spikes. But I went and took those messages and I said, okay, what were they about? And so I looked at which messages were anything to do with BGP, ISIS, OSPF, route flaps in some variety. These are core, as in my mind, to what we know about and how we worry about our networks that we operate. And you know, it goes up and down, it ebbs and flows, but in reality it's a good percentage, maybe 20–25% of what we discuss on the mailing lists. We discuss a little bit more spam and terrorism. This is an interesting trend. I don't know quite what happened in '99. Maybe we all got bored with it, but we stopped talking about spam for a while. Terrorism obviously has some important dates in this timeline as well. So the question is, does this have anything to do with the corporate world? Is this okay? And the answer is, I think it is. We have this morbid interest in what our competitors are worth. That's a pre-2000, pre-bubble type mindset. We have an acceptable interest in where AES is going, who's merging with who's going to be seen with who, what happens to peering policies, the dreaded de-peering word. But then on the other side, there's, I think, pretty clear evidence that we completely ignore this whole thing, and that people move their opinions as they change companies. We've actually seen that with routing policy to a certain extent. But the important part at the end is that when you look at all the corporate changes, it's all been research. Okay, we have two different companies. I've seen John's talk. I am not going to discuss that. John hits that perfectly. I tried to give a list of all of the different companies and their AS numbers and their name changes and where they've gone, and I think I actually have that Genuity went to GTE Internet Working, not to BBN, and then it went to Genuity again, and then finally to Level 3, and you know, yes, NetRail shows up on this graph somewhere, and Cogent, and names have gone and disappeared and come back, and you know, it took me a while today. I had to ask around, where did AS209, that Quest, a telco, where did that come from? Colorado Supercomputing Network. Some people have managed to stay the same. Some are in little islands all by themselves, no acquisitions in any way. But in reality, there's this movement, continuous movement towards, quite frankly, telcos owning the IP backbones that were built by independent ISPs. The interesting thing is, one of the very few trends which is as new as one can get is that cable and wireless is actually splitting in half. So, you know, whereas everything else is a merger, there's actually an example of something splitting up slightly. I wanted to try and show what consolidation looked like, but it's a classic de-peering notice. But it's vague enough that it's legally acceptable. It's not determined the precise date for shutting down the CompuServe connection. I picked CompuServe because this was a public, a piece of information that hit the public domain. It turned out this was okay for most people, but I picked a nice example. I didn't want to push the envelope. Anyway, two people that I want to introduce and talk and expound upon this and give you their opinions. John Curran, who I actually should have added Aaron to that list as well, but CTO, XO Communications, previously with various ASs, he can fill that in. And also Doug Humphreys, who's one of the founders from Digex, and also Sidera Skycache. So I will leave it for the two of them.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to welcome the troops to the 10-year anniversary of the Rebel Forces. 10 years of telco resistance going well. Glad to see everyone's here. That meant most of you weren't out last night with my group or UUJSB out there. So Yeah, I'm John Curran. I did once take a week off of vacation in the early 90s to learn how to write BSD device drivers. I'm a product of BBN, Bolt, Beranek, and Newman. I have since then had to go underground. I am now a stealth operative in a telco. My particular telco is XO Communications. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the internet has survived being merged with the telcos. This is the beginning. It's been covered 3 times so far this morning. I'm not going to do it again. I just want to say we're on a mission. Certainly, when I went to some of the first NANOG meetings, we had a simple mission. We were connecting people to the internet. And the internet was special because it was not one-to-one. It was not my private data network. It was one connection, get you connectivity anywhere. One of the telling things that happened back at CSNet and the early days of NearNet was I had companies tell me, I don't care what speed the connection is. It can be 56 kilobits. It could be 19.2. We actually sold some pretty scary low-speed connections back then because any connectivity was better than none. One little connection to the internet got you every email address in the world. So that was what we were doing. And in fact, there was a lot of cooperation. Rick Adams used to refer customers, Rick was at UUNet back then, used to refer customers to BBN. He'd say, hey, we don't serve that, but John will hook you up at BBN. And I'd turn around and I'd say to customers who wouldn't be in our area, hey, call Rick, he's got a node over there. And yeah, there was a money motivation here, or in some cases it was, grant money, but the reality is the goal was get everyone connected. That's still the mission, okay? Sure, we've had to dodge and merge and hide. Some of us have become stealth operatives, but the reality is our goal is the same, universal connectivity. Phil actually said it a little earlier, the internet was meant to connect people. It's an end-to-end model. Well, let's see how much we can keep that end-to-end model, but the reality is the dream is alive and well. We have done it, in the past at least, we did it without content regulation or the need to wear suits. I'm not sure that's going to continue forever. We went through the wild years, and I guess some of the things that people may not have noticed in the wild years was, one, 100% annual traffic growth is hard on cash, and ISPs were really bad at raising money, and telcos are really good at raising money. So that was one of those big drivers. Anything between the router and the fiber is in the way. Scott came up earlier and he said, well, we built it on existing technology. That was a good starter kit, but the reality is that every bit of that existing technology was a problem in the 5 years from 96 to 2001. You're using our internet service for what's my favorite one? We sent out a message at one point for weekend maintenance, and what came back was someone at the Harvard Longwood medical area saying, you can't take it down Sunday from 2 to 4 a.m. I'm like, why not? It's the internet. I said, well, we're doing medical imaging, and the guy coming out of brain surgery is going to be in an MRI at another school, and I really need the network to be up to know whether or not we got it all. And I'm just like, you're doing the internet. This is 1996, folks. We had people doing medical imaging across this. Well, the time we discovered a nuclear power plant doing SNMP to monitor, as a backup system, their power plants. So the users are creative. One of the great things about an end-to-end model where we're not regulating it is they'll come up with all sorts of cool applications. There's a downside to that I want to talk about. The telcos have reasons why they object to this end-to-end model. So, of course, what happened? Late 1996, everyone woke up and we said, the carrier side of the world said, this thing isn't going away. There was some experience in Sprint and MCI. There were little groups doing research projects like SprintLink and the VBNS. There was another carrier, AT&T. They actually said point blank, our customers don't want or need the internet. They're never going to use it. It doesn't have the reliability of the AT&T network. Well, okay, 1996, 1997, new game plan, new story. I guess we do need the internet. Problem was most of the carriers, a lot of them, didn't have a group. They didn't have an organization that knew internet. And so, if you try to hire internet geeks in 1997 and say, hey, you want to come work at my telco? I can tell you what our dress code is, and we have a great retirement plan, and there are no stock options. It was kind of hard to recruit internet geeks in 1997 to go work in a telco. So it didn't leave a lot of choice. You had to go acquire if you were a telco and you wanted to be in the internet play. The other reason the telcos were excited is this was unregulated. I don't know if anyone knew the economic model of carriers, but there were a lot of carriers who knew how many dollars of profit they were going to make by the first day of the year. They looked at their budget for the year, and if they knew they were going to spend $1 billion in expenses, they could multiply by 6%, and they were going to make a 6% return. Because all of their expenses went to a commission, that told them you're allowed to make 6% on anything you spend. Set your rate so that you get 6% back on $1 billion investment. So if you were a carrier, you couldn't make more money without spending more money. It was impossible. Your regulated services didn't let you make money. So you had to get unregulated. And hey, this is all unregulated internet stuff. This began the mating rituals, which Martin charted a little bit, and it was interesting. A lot of people tried to forecast where this was going. In 1996, Bob Metcalf on the NANOG list had a great running gun battle with a bunch of us, saying, you know what? The internet, at the end of the day, yes, he had an argument about whether or not we were going to collapse a few years later, but earlier he had an argument saying there's no way the merger of telcos and ISPs is going to work unless NANOG opens its doors and brings some people in suits in to help run this, okay, to help guide ISPs. Not the technical people. We need your boss's boss to come here and talk about how to regulate, finance, and charge the internet. Guess what, folks? That was an interesting forecast, another Metcalf wonder. And it's interesting. We've survived that. A few of us. I've donned a suit on occasion, so I could actually have been crossed over. But the reality is we're doing just fine, and we don't have a lot of people here who are representing firms, work for law firms, who are necessarily the official corporate spokesman. We're still busy trying to keep the network running. So there was forecasts that in this collision of ISPs and telcos, we were going to be the losing crowd. What did happen? Well, there's a few things that happened. You cannot grow the traffic rates we grew in those 5 years without getting as close to the fiber as possible. There were a lot of nice models. I heard people say, well, ATM has a role in a backbone. All right, that's interesting. ATM has a role in the edge of the network. ATM's a good way to get to the end user on the cable modem or on the end of the DSL line. That's great. I love all that. That's wonderful. When you take a look at the fact that we didn't need any of that, the cost of a fiber plus the optics, then to go in a sonnet box, come out of the sonnet box so it can go into something like an ATM switch, so it can come out of the ATM switch so you can run a line to your router port. And then you double the traffic and you have to upgrade every port along that circuit. You knew that wasn't going to work. Every bit of technology between the fiber and our traffic, okay, between the routers and the fiber, got thrown out. We just couldn't do it. This is how we ended up with IP directly over fiber. This is how we ended up in the edge infrastructures, getting rid of, in a lot of cases, there's no ATM or frame relay anymore in a lot of our edge infrastructures. It's direct, and we had no choice. You couldn't double the network without getting rid of the technology. That wonderful existing technology that let us get our jump start was in the way to scale. We actually do use COS. A lot of carriers do COS. They just don't let your customers use it. When you take all your voice networks and you tear them down and you move to voice over IP, you really need to get the voice over IP traffic from LA to New York without getting in the way of anyone else. So there's COS. Does it end up in the customer edge? Not really. We might see that. It's a good question. Certainly it should be externalized. It should be possible for you to say, here's my packets that are more important, and here's my ones that are less important. But it's a hard question of whether anyone's bright enough to actually do that as a service. We're still without regard to content. In general, your internet services from your carriers are content free. Now, I'm not talking about your end user subscribers. I'm not talking about your online services. I'm talking about your carrier networks. The problem is society has some interesting roles for telcos. You know, this is where policy comes and sort of rubber hits the pavement. Your telco is required to enforce a bunch of laws. Some of these laws are really cool, okay? I want to know all the phone calls that he made to her over the last 2 weeks. And I don't care if it's encrypted and voice over IP. I don't care anything. I presently have the ability to get a wiretap between those two people without either one of them knowing it. 10 years from now, I'm going to have that ability. Okay, folks? You know it. You know they have it now. 10 years from now, they're going to have that ability. They're going to go to a telco and they're going to say, I don't know what service you're rolling out, but you'd better be aware that 10 years from now, we have the same capabilities we have today, right? That's a problem. As much as I love end-to-end, okay, society is told, now, you know, society / politics / voting / I'm not going to say where the requirement comes from, but there's a requirement that's in laws that say this has to happen. That's a challenge. We got some other challenge. Digital rights management came up earlier. You know, the summary that was given this morning by the speaker didn't quite cover all the nuances of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. The reality is that you don't need to get all the way to court before you can show up at a telco's doorstep and ask for some of those records. And so we've actually had cases where Verizon's lost, where as a carrier, you've got to provide records for information you may not have, and it might not actually involve a court. This is a problem, folks. So as the end-to-end model of the internet is growing and as we're expanding like mad, the problem is that we're in the middle. We're the folks who are the truth of the internet embedded in these carriers, and every one of them has got someone here. We're the ones who have to somehow compromise between the pure internet, end-to-end, with no one watching, no model that's in the way, no services. The user can do anything he wants. It's all open. Authentication? We never needed authentication. You can do whatever you want. And the other side of the world, which is a government/regulatory model, which says you will know every user. If I have a law that affects you, you'll be able to find that user. Every user is responsible for what he sends, and you'll be able to determine that if I come back and I have a claim against a particular packet, message, byte, or TCP stream. In the middle is us scratching our heads going, well, got to keep the internet true. At the same time, we got to make sure we follow the laws for as long as they exist. This is a huge challenge. I wear a suit more days now than I used to, trying to prevent the internet model from being extinguished. And it's a problem, folks. So this battle's going on now. We got one little problem out as well. I don't know if people's noticed it, but you know, this whole internet bubble, the internet bubble happened, then the telco caught on. Telcos are slow. By the time they invest all the money, the bubble was already collapsing. So you had all these carriers who put hundreds of millions of dollars into networks that are empty. You would be amazed at the number of empty networks out there. The reason you're seeing now divestitures, the reason you're seeing another round of consolidations is there's a lot of empty networks. And this is another problem. We are having one more round of consolidation. Do not be surprised if you see, maybe only 20 big networks, maybe only 10 big networks in the US, because there are so many empty networks out there. There are so many people who have bill payments and bond payments that are coming due that are going to affect our industry. I am optimistic. Scott said he's pessimistically optimistic. I guess I have to vote on that as well. I'll take the same side. I've learned a couple of lessons throughout the years of being a stealth operative and trying to bring the internet religion into the telco. I guess I'll share 4 of them. Good ideas generally prevail in the end. It takes time. Even telcos can learn how to do something. You just have to give yourself 4 or 5 years to get the philosophy in place. Folks, I'm dealing with the same people now with different names. I have customers who used to be coworkers. I have coworkers who are now my customers. I have peers who now talk to my boss. It's a small industry. You have to learn how to talk to people. You have to learn how to say yes and no and still be professional, because none of us are going away. It's going to be the same room here with most of the same faces another 10 years from now, and I'm actually looking forward to that too. Customers are going to be more creative than we expect. And we, and I mean we, the ISPs and the telcos, are going to be held responsible. Do not think the fact that that's a peer-to-peer network or the fact that that is an end-to-end session is going to get you off the hook when some senator shows up and some federal marshal shows up and they hand you a court order. They're going to want to know what it is. And so we've either in this room and in the IETF designed architectures for that, or you're going to be sitting there with your mouth open while they talk about the contempt order. We are responsible for what's over it until someone changes the law to say otherwise. And so that's a big challenge. Last one is, I hope, at least to this date, you can infiltrate the empire and be true to the cause. We're still doing connectivity. Most of us don't have to wear suits to work. It's still an end-to-end model, except for the fact that a lot of customers seem to like NAT. Hopefully V6 will give us a fresh charge at that. But the reality is the merger of the telcos and the ISPs hasn't necessarily been bad for either side. That's it for me. Thank you.
With no further ado, I will introduce Doug Humphries.
I tried to prepare some slides, but the statute of limitations has not run out on most of the things I wanted to put up. So, yeah, this is such an amorphous topic that all 3 of us are approaching it completely differently, which is perfect. So I think that works. Anybody out there, a show of hands, how many of you guys actively use thermal paper printers somewhere, hard copy terminals somewhere in the deep dark past. Okay, that's. Oh no, I don't mean like last night or something. Yeah. I had talked to a guy about silent 700s, and he was like, "Oh, I had one of those," and I was like, "God, that used to rip my arm off." He's like, "Yeah, I know. I like my wife is in the audience. Like, you have to tell me that, okay?" eBay. Anyway, but yeah, seriously, and I was like, "No, man, those weighed 80 pounds," and this guy's talking about like a 745. I'm like, "No, man, the 725. It goes back." But there was a time, to look back into kind of the ARPANET days a little bit, there was a time when, as you were driving around, these are the signs of early network geekdom, you knew where every dial-up terminal within driving distance was. None of them were yours, but you knew where they were, and you knew your ARPANET tip and TAC dial-up numbers. And you knew that you could nick into like the National Agricultural Library, and when those two librarians weren't on duty, you could slide over to the terminals, which were for official use only. But you also knew that you had to bring your own thermal paper, because that was a critical short supply item over there. So you were always driving around going, "Where can I nick some thermal paper?" So, I guess we've been doing this a while, a lot of us. In a way, the internet is just so disappointing that it's so easy now. Which plays a key part of this whole thing, I think. Corporateness, which is not a word, but that's okay. I'm not a big fan of corporateness. That's probably an understatement. And yet I'm more of a fan of a little bit of corporateness than a lot of the people who have worked for me before. Although, of course, the one person who said, "Doug micromanages me," another guy who worked for me said, "What, he asks once a week what's happening? This is micromanagement? I'll introduce you to Carl Ginter. He'll micromanage your ass." Carl's an old friend of mine, but he understands micromanagement very well. I'm not much into the micromanagement thing. I think it's nice to have people just, know what their goals are and kind of move toward them, but then not everybody cooperates with that too. So I think that the corporateness of the internet, we're at a pendulum swing. We were at an extreme point of no corporateness a little while ago. It's only been 10 years, and yet, oh my God, it's been 10 years. So we've got this sort of, it seems like forever, and it seems like yesterday, that the internet was a few little companies doing this crazy weird thing, and the telcos, as these guys have said, we're like, that's not going to count, and AT&T figured if you 64K to the desktop would damn well be good enough for you, and that would be it. And in 10 years, a lot has changed. And what we've got now is, I think, the pendulum was swinging toward freedom, deregulation and everything. And then the internet boom and the VC pumping trillions of dollars in pushed that out even further. The wild, wild west popped up even harder. But there's a backlash to this now. Now you'll notice that deregulation is not the trend any longer, which is really funny because Republicans are in power, and I thought that, never mind, okay. Yeah. Obviously I'm mistaken there. I'll have to go check my notes. I thought they were dereg guys. What's happening is the pendulum is starting to come the other way, as it always does, and dereg is going away. If you're a CLEC, I happen to be a CLEC in another lifetime, every time the new rules come down, every 4 to 6 months, Verizon is able to chop something out and stop offering something to us CLECs and stop, oh, we can't do dark fiber anymore, oh, we can't offer these facilities anymore. You can feel the vice. It's very slowly being twisted in on you, but you can feel it. So boosting that, separate from that, but boosting that is the whole 9/11 Homeland Security thing, which is not part of this normal play. I mean, if you looked at the script for the next 10 years, I'm sure there is one somewhere, that wasn't in it. But just like the VC thing was sort of an external thing that all of a sudden accelerated the pendulum toward craziness, now the pendulum's swinging back, and 9/11, Homeland Defense, all that stuff is swinging it back even harder. So if you got kind of a feel for the rhythm of the pendulum, be warned that that rhythm is, your gut feel may be wrong here. That rhythm may get thrown off by the fact that this external force is coming in to really shove that pendulum around the other way. So that's probably a push toward corporateness. When the description of the ASNs and everything was, I couldn't help but think of Penn and Teller. If you've ever seen Teller do the card mojo, I mean, he's just a blur. I think we should get Teller to get, a set of ASN cards, and he could, with them, and okay, follow the card, because it is pretty funny. Somebody said ASN 1 was up for auction on eBay or something, but I don't believe them. Not the company, just the ASN, Oh, so ASN 2 was offered for sale? Maybe that's what I had heard. Okay. ASN 2, we try harder. Okay. So the problem with the suits, well, gee, that's a whole nother talk, but suits are old tech. I mean, by definition, even the most techie suit, now I'm not holding John out as an example of the most techie suit. John is not really a suit. He's undercover, working for us. So, when he puts the suit on, he still has the magic that keeps the suit from really affecting his soul too much, which is a good thing. He takes those pills every morning like we told him to, and, you are taking the pills, right, John? Okay, good. Because, it's your soul that, the suit isn't all about money. Okay, yes, the suit is all about money, but, it's your soul that's really, really at risk here. But suits don't understand anything new, but they understand the old stuff. I have bad news. Internet is old stuff. Oh, shit. Pardon me. But, really, look, we wake up one morning and it's like, oh no, gray hair, gray network, oh no. This is old stuff now. Back when we started doing this, it was a miracle that the packets got from one end to the other, back when we were playing with fuzzballs on PDP-11s, the packets didn't get from one end to the other, but it was okay. We understood where they were. Now, it's like it's old hat to be running OC48 and OC182 all over the place, and So the bad news is the suits are actually catching up. So if we're going to maintain our independence here, we kind of got to do something new, throw the suits off the trail a little bit. They ooze into the situation. And that's really, when the situation stops being super dynamic, that's when suit ooze can occur. Now, admittedly, we had suits at some of the earlier ISPs as we went public and did things like that. But the good news was they really didn't understand what was going on. There was like management and there was the ISP. And the only thing connecting them was like EdKern, so it's okay. The answer is no, and that was that. Did you know that we used to be called ISPs and now we're starting to be called independent ISPs? That's a bad sign. Because we used to be the ISPs, and now it's, they're an independent ISP, not owned by the megas, that are in the power. So now this all may sound doom and gloom, maybe. There's another parallel that is interesting. Hearing the whole talk that we just went through, this all sounds like Chiapas. This all sounds like Northern Ireland to me. You have the insurgents, the rebels, the resistance. That would be us, In my generation, they're the good guys in the movies. And then you've got, the government. And there seems to be this uneasy alliance starting to come together between the rebel factions and the big players. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're 10 years on in this experiment now. It's not a bad thing that we're coming together like that. It's just reality, really. The pendulum swing, the economy, all sorts of other things pushing it in that direction. We should work together. Remember what, I guess, Ronald Reagan said, the trust but verify. That's always a good one. But the real key, I think, is, and this is hard for us because this is an area not of our expertise, is the legal part of this. We can win on the tech. Don't ever think that the government guys who are legislating the bell-shaped heads out there, all these carrier guys. We can out-tech these guys, you know, with one wrench strapped behind our backs, okay? These guys truly don't get it. They only get it because it has been static for a little while. But watch out for the laws. These guys are going to try to put down a set of legal constraints because even though they probably don't consciously know it, subconsciously they know the real danger. The real danger is we did this once and we could do it again. And if they put the screws to us too hard and they actually try to shut this whole thing down, remember that AT&T ISDN to your desk, da-da-da-da-da? You may not believe this, but that's not dead. That's just dormant. It's going to wake up again. It's like the cicadas. It's on a 7-year cycle or something. That's going to pop up again. Now, it's not going to be 56K. It's going to be 56 megabits to desktop, very beautifully monitored by a government agency that does nothing but that, and, you know, metered and controlled and all that stuff. That dream isn't dead. That evil, nasty dream is still out there. And these guys, there's still a big faction of people, John Ashcroft, excuse me, who really, really, really want to say this internet thing is just unmanageable and a security risk and it needs to go away. And we really need to have this beautiful, shining example of a network in its place. Enter AT&T, whoever it is. And actually, it'll be Ma Bell, because all those big companies, a lot of them are getting back together to reform Ma Bell. You know, what comes around goes around. So we need to be aware of the legal fight, because the way they're going to try to put the handcuffs on us isn't going to be in technical stuff, because we can out-tech them. But it's going to be in legal strictures that it's going to make it illegal for John to send packets to Doug without going through some third party. And that's the direction that a lot of these powerful guys really want to take this. And I know that sounds really, really nasty and scary, but there it is. So watch the legal stuff. Don't just roll over when it comes by. We got to fight it tooth and nail. And get together with everybody, but when they ask you to turn over your weapons, don't do it, okay? You know, it's a common thing. I love the Northern Ireland stuff about, well, you know, we want peace with these people, but when we tell them to turn over all the weapons, they don't do it. Duh. It's like, oh, here, I trust you very much, sir. Here, put the weapons. Oh, bracelets for me? Thank you so much. You know, what are you talking about? So definitely go bury some 2501s in your backyard, because you never know when you might have to start all over again, okay? Livingston Portmasters and stuff are really cheap on eBay, and as far as I know, they don't track them yet. So, you know, you're okay. It hasn't been declared a munition yet. Okay, there. So that was definitely a different take than you probably got from the other two guys. So you know.
Yeah, I'm asking, does anybody have questions prior to lunch? I'll be surprised. But anyway, we've got I'll give it 5 minutes. The young gentleman over there.
I am not a Swede. Don't set the microphone at 6'3". This is Bill Manning, and Phil, I find your presentation and the ISP panel presentations kind of interesting from two perspectives. The first perspective is that, Phil, in your case, you seem to discount what is sometimes called the clue factor. I've heard it said that the amount of clue is the same. We are now spreading it over a larger number of people. So spreading the butter thin, you know, can we actually insist that operating systems people still give us plenty of flexibility because the operators of those endpoints are clueful enough to type make? Right. So that's something that you didn't touch on, and I think is important as a factor in history and evolution. Now, from the ISP's perspective, I sort of remember my early days of the internet, which means I probably was there. If you remember too much, you weren't there, or you were on some more caffeine than probably is legal. Telco is a transport mechanism for IP. In early internet days, there were IP running over things other than the public switch telephone network was an option. At what point did that no longer become viable?
So the reality, Bill, is that you can still do it. In fact, Phil highlighted one of the nicest things that's happened in the world is public wireless nodes, okay? The reality is that that's a great underground revolution motion that, the carriers are looking at that. A few of them actually, Verizon Wireless looked and said, we're going to allow these for our customers and put them out there, not because we're going to make any money on them whatsoever, but we'll at least know who's using them. And someday, if we want to make money, we can figure out how to do that afterwards. So, I mean, that literally you've got carriers building wireless networks that look like public access nodes just because, well, if we build it, it can be public until we decide it's not public or until we decide what rules apply to it. The reality is that those free nodes that are out there are great things because it allows community networking. There are communities actually, there are states that are building their own networks as well. There are towns that are building their own networks. And that's good because they get to make their own rules. It's not that you can't do it, it's just the problem is when you get higher up into how do we get this traffic across the country, how do we hand it off in a cost-effective manner, it becomes a lot harder to do that. One of the biggest challenges we've got right now is that we have on occasion people who show up and they say, look, see this host, see this IP address? You sent me a packet from that IP address. You're legally liable. And I'm like, well, I'm a carrier. I'm not legally liable for any packet. They say, well, give me the name of the customer. And I go to the ISP below me, and he goes to the ISP below him, and he goes to the ISP below him, and when time you get to the third ISP, no one knows who sent that packet, okay? That's incompatible with a lot of the current requirements that exist on telecommunication services in the voice side that are being remapped somewhat blindly into data. So the answer, Bill, is you can run it, but at some point, don't be surprised if someone shows up to your wireless node and says, you have to obey CALIA, or you have to block packets that you think are VoIP packets, because it's the same requirements. It doesn't matter whether you're regulated or not. That law is a law. They turned you off. And I didn't ask that.
They did turn me off, and I can shout loud. So is CALIA applied to my carrier pigeons?
You know, I'm not the one who says what it applies to. I only get to say how I don't think it applies.
Yeah.
Okay?
So
the woman was earlier here today. That would have been a good question.
Okay.
Avi Friedman from Akamai. To respond to Doug's point, I think that the danger of the arms all being confiscated is relatively low. Most of the ex-ISPs that I know wind up with a little ISP in their basement with some servers and some dial-up modems and some T1s and, of course, the eBay swag phenomena. But to respond to your point about the regulation, it's sort of interesting because, as was pointed out, we used to think that this was all neat and wonderful and needed our connectivity fix. And now we have it, it's just so much easier that it's almost a letdown and disappointing. And because people didn't go through that shared pain, they don't realize how valuable it is. So we sort of need like the Ben Franklin quotes for the internet to apply to this. But I will tell you that I do a lot of work with different government agencies. And I thought that the involvement that I had in HavenCo would really be a downer. It turns out that most people in the government think that things like HavenCo are really cool. And they actually think that the internet is cool. And everyone but the FBI actually thinks that anonymous proxying networks would be wonderful. Go talk to Voice of America. Hell, talk to the people in Maryland who do the spooky things. They all like, very few people percentage-wise are into restriction. It's the powerful people who are relatively small who are. But there's a broad base of people who can actually provide the strategy about how to affect the kind of thought change we're looking for. So I don't know what the answer is because most government agencies don't have enough budget to send a lot of people, but perhaps many of us internet folks can take up a collection and ask them to send their clueful people, and we can get that dialogue going. Because the informal dialogue is what we really need to be able to head off things like that and have people on the inside actually become our agents, sort of the John Currans of the government. So,
But yeah, my God, yeah. To your comment, I was really disappointed that the Homeland Security guys don't have a liaison to this org, or didn't just send somebody. Because, I mean, we could do spot the Fed here, but we all know each other. It'd be too easy.
Well, they can't even
but,
budget.
you know, I mean, yeah, somebody to say, hey, I'm here to kind of learn what's going on and to answer questions. But instead, what they did is sent the usual, hi, I don't understand anything, but here are 4 slides. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. And so we should probably urge them to send some clueful guys to show up and spend a little time and actually know what the hell they're talking about. So it's a good point. So we can help them.
Yeah, it's close to lunch, and one quick comment, one last question. But you live in Maryland, and who do you work for these days?
Well, I don't know. There's this huge fiber. It goes up to Fort Meade. You know, I don't know.
Last question.
This is actually more a response to what Avi just said. As one of the people who wound up with a legacy network in my basement, it's really easy to sort of sit back and look at that and say, yeah, that's really easy now, and we know how to do that, and it's not much of a challenge anymore, and it doesn't seem like it used to. And that's true if you just leave it alone and have it cranking along on its TDM circuits. But that's not the way the internet is getting built by the people who are out there doing now what we were doing 10 and 15 years ago, right? We operate a bit of a testbed network in Samoa because we can do it with no regulation. Our deal there is we aren't regulated as long as they keep getting better and better service. And applying the same sort of things that we can learn there and in Africa and Southeast Asia at home is difficult because of regulation, but that is the challenge, right? That is the thing that is not as easy as sitting back and letting stuff continue to crank along on TDM circuits. Figuring out how to really cheaply get your CLEC status and actually get and implement your pole sharing and conduit sharing agreements and getting your own fiber into the street to connect up your friends in your town and getting a little exchange point going so that the people who aren't on your fiber can still talk to you by getting through their friends' fiber. We've got the same challenges. It's just a different decade.
What time are we back?